Zeke, we have been talking about digital publishing for many years now,
Yeah.
and we have been publishing content on our websites and trying to persuade people to buy this content with no great success. Now we are going into the world of digital publishing on the magazine business. How do you see the future on that issue?
Sure. So what we found is that people are willing to pay for content on iPads and tablets like the iPad. And I think it comes down to a couple things. One is that as humans, we're used to paying for things that we acquire and that we can hold and own. And generally, things in the real world that you can buy are wholly contained, right? So this cup has a top and a bottom and a side, and I can take it and move it from one place to another. The web is not an object to people. The web is a place. Right, and so you go there, and it feels like it's infinite. And so I think it feels like a location. And we're not used to paying for locations. Whereas on the iPad, you get an issue of a magazine, right, and it has a front cover and a back cover and everything in between. And you get that thing and pay for it. And I think you feel more naturally associated with being able to pay for things because it feels like a concrete object.
So on the iPad, you feel the magazine more like a kind of commodity.
Yeah, exactly, like a thing. And then the second thing is that on the internet, as even a novice, it's very hard to tell the difference between professionally produced content and free content, because they all basically look like a couple pictures and a bunch of text. And if you look at a website created by some of the most powerful publishers in the world, and look at a website made by an amateur, they look almost exactly the same. And it's not until you read everything in them that you can tell that the story's better from the professional. On a digital magazine, you can immediately look and see that some companies have spent more time and energy crafting something that feels more expensive. So in the same way that I think someone can look at a Mercedes or an Audi and tell that it's different from a Volkswagen or a Kia, and the subtle differences, even though they're all made of the same metal and the same plastic and the same rubber, I think those same subtle differences are the things that people use to distinguish between magazines that I should pay for and websites which are free. And I think those things, like, what we want to do is give designers the ability to have control over the experience such that they can express that sense of quality visually. Does that make sense? And so an end user sees that, and they don't know why it looks more expensive. They don't know why it looks like something that's of quality, but they can tell that it's different and somehow better. And it has an association with the print magazine, which is something they're used to paying for. And so that similarity, playing off of the similarity between those two things, I think is really important.
But I guess it's also about new business models. You can offer new things to your customers, your readers, your subscribers, the companies that advertise in your magazines.
So what we're finding is that frankly, the publishers who are having the most success are actually taking a business model that's very similar to their existing print business model and bringing it onto the iPad. So for example, you can buy individual issues just like you could buy them at the newsstand, and you could subscribe just like you could subscribe at the newsstand. And most publishers in the US are running versions of the same ads from print on digital and charging advertisers for that. So that model is, I think, in some sense, bringing the print model along onto the digital world. But what they're also finding is that it's very easy now to create one-off artifacts that are collections of old content that they can then rebundle and sell as new things. And so it is much easier to remix and modify and change digital artifacts. And so what we're finding is that people are often creating collections of back issues, collections of things from their archive, rebundling them quickly and then selling them. And so that is a source of new revenue. And then some publishers are also allowing advertisers to create far more interactive ads. And generally they charge advertisers more for that. So that's also a source of new revenue for publishers.
I grew up in the traditional graphics business. Okay. Where you used to send a PDF file to your printer, and he published a certain number of issues, and you distributed it to the local postal office, and in a week or two the readers would have them in the living room. Today it's a brand new world. You're not just a publisher, you're also an IT guy. You have to deal with different sorts of problems. Is that an obstacle for the publishers today?
there's definitely a lot of new things to learn, right? But when you first started learning how to publish, you had to learn about printers. And you had to learn about ink and color spaces and things like that. And in the beginning, that was daunting. And over time, you got better at that. And I think in the same sense, there's a bunch of new things you need to learn to do digital publishing. But I think if you pick them up one at a time, you'll learn that. And the publishers who've been in this space for the whole history, 2.5 years, are now becoming much better at it. And I think we'll slowly introduce new tools, and it'll feel as natural soon to publish digitally as it does to publish to a printer.
Where do you see digital publishing go from today and in the future? Will the printed issues disappear?
I don't think the printed issues will ever fully disappear in the same way that vinyl records, I don't think they'll ever go away. I think that there'll probably be a future where there's no tapes with music anymore. And there's probably going to be a future when there's no CDs or DVDs, but I don't think the vinyl record will ever leave. In that same sense, I don't think the printed magazine or newspaper will ever leave completely. Although I do think that most people will shift from reading primarily in print to reading primarily in digital. There's two things that printed magazines do that I think we haven't yet figured out how to capture digitally. And one of them is that print magazines, being a physical artifact made of atoms, have with them a sense of ecological guilt associated with them. And so if you have it sitting there lying on your table and you've paid for it and you've used resources from the world there, you feel slightly guilty about throwing it away before you've read it. And I think that drive forces you to see it and to pick it up and to read it as often as possible. And so even if your back issues collect up in a stack, you still feel guilty about not reading them. On your iPad, if the back issues are sitting there in some corner collecting like your old email, I think you don't feel that same sense of guilt. And so what we're trying to do is figure out ways of causing people to be reminded that their magazines are on their device and reminded to read them, because we know that once they start reading them, they love it, but sometimes they forget to do that. The second thing is that, in every grocery store and convenience store in America at least, and pretty much everywhere in the world, a good chunk of the store is filled with a newsstand, and that newsstand has in it the logos of your magazines, and that reminds people that magazine content is there and that they might want to spend some of their time reading it. So I believe that over time, people will go to the grocery store to buy groceries, see the name of the magazines that they have subscriptions to in there, maybe not buy them, but then read them on the device that they have. But that cue to read it, I think, is really important. And I think that publishers that stop publishing in print will lose that opportunity and their brands may fade away. And so I think that'll keep people publishing in print for quite some time.
Okay. We're talking about the newsstand and especially the digital newsstand. I guess that in this world where we are connecting still furthermore with social media, the reader experience will be a brand new experience in the future. How do you see that from your point of view?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, which is that stories are useful because they enable us to have conversations about those stories, right? I think the primary purpose of reading most magazines is to enable us to have conversations about the things that are in there. And I think those conversations are increasingly happening in the virtual space. And so what we want to do is make it really easy to have conversations about content in magazines, to be able to refer to those and view them on whatever device you're on, and then to use that to pull people back into the magazine to read it. So for example, if I get really excited about an article about a new musician and I share it with my friends, I'd like to be able to talk about that right there in, say, Facebook or Twitter or Pinterest or wherever. And then when they see that there in Facebook and want to read that article, they should be able to click and see it immediately, like they can in Digital Publishing Suite in their desktop. And then they can see that magazine and read it and get a sense of what it is that I'm writing about. And I believe that by doing that, by spreading the content wildly out through social networks, it'll cause some people to want to get more information and get more articles, and then they'll pull in, become subscribers. And so that path of starting with someone who's passionate, sharing with their friends, and then pulling them into the reader to start consuming content will make far more people want to read magazines and newspapers and things like that. So that's, I think, the way that social networks will enhance magazines.